We good to go? Fantastic. Right, let's see if the mental mnemonic maps are working. So I want to propose a theory, and it would be nice if anyone can find some counterexamples. So throughout the presentation, you could just think of any films that you can think of that violate this theory. It comes in two parts, quite simple. All of the fluffy sci-fi, the sort of happy, family-friendly, silly stuff, the comedy, all of it will have something that necessitates a metaphysically realist outlook. On the other hand, all the darker sci-fi will not necessitate realism at any point and will further, most often, pose challenges to it. The little star I'm going to add here is that if something violates this rule, it's probably very bad sci-fi and it's not the fault of my theory. Anything outside these two categories is just something else. So like The Matrix, it's not horror, it's not fluffy, funny sci-fi, doesn't count. Just these two. So I want to quickly introduce first the theories and then the examples of what I mean in sci-fi, and then run through a rapid-style introduction to just applying it over and over again very quickly, 2 seconds apiece. So, should we start with Paul? No, let's start with, similar to Paul, price. So, one realist was Price. He's an Oxford guy, he wrote in 1953, and he starts his book by telling us he's bored. Nobody else was bored in 1953 in England, so this is just incredible. This fact just continuously blows my mind that somebody in England, 1953, has the audacity to write down, yeah, life's kind of boring. It's the same old thing all the time. But he did, and he tells us things are the same because we see similar properties everywhere. So this desk is wood or faux wood, and other things are wood or faux wood, and some things are white and such. And so if different things share these properties, it suggests there is a property to be shared. So the property exists. And further, generally in realist conceptions, it exists outside of the actual thing. So some actions are just, some are evil, some are nasty, some people are intelligent. So we have intelligence, justice, nastiness. We believe in these things. So metaphysical realism is there to explain what we mean by the sentence, to have something for our words to correspond to, and further to show similarity, to explain similarity. So if I say this ground can be stood upon and I can also stand on the chairs, there's some similar property there. So the realist theory shows us there's one property, they're both sharing, that explains similarity. And let's say these chairs, they're fairly similar. Some are orange, some are gray, so they're not exactly the same. Price's theory is meant to tell us how things can be slightly similar but not entirely similar. Reason being, they share some qualities. And you can have like two-place qualities, like you can be in love with somebody or know somebody, so you'd call these relations. And overall, the idea is of a universal. A universal is some property which is instantiated across the entire universe. So jumping into Paul as our first example, he reaffirms that our worldview, like the realist state, is broadly acceptable, it makes sense, and the universe responds to it. And he's very sociable, he smokes a cigarette, he's like us, he can understand our world. Now, the realist might object at this point that this doesn't really instantiate the theory in any serious way. He's just very intelligent. He knows English. There's nothing special about it. But watch this for an absolute necessitation of realism. Paul.
Yes. Do you mind if I take a look at it for 1 second? What does it say in the Old Testament? An eye for an eye?
Wait, I don't...
It's okay. You can trust me.
I don't know.
Just have a little faith, okay?
did you do that?
Evolution, baby.
Right, so did you spot that oddity there? Paul the alien has taken a disease out of somebody's eye. This means there is such a thing as disease in the universe. It's not something you need to recognize. You might say that beauty is not in the paintings, you just think of beauty. And you might also say that there's no disease in the universe. There are cells, some of them make eyeballs, but they're not really eyeballs. They're just things in our heads, they're squishy. We want them to function for vision. So when they're in the right place, but they don't function for vision, we say the eyeball is diseased. It's a way of seeing the world. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of feeling about the world. There's no necessity to actually believe in disease. But here, Paul tells us there is such a thing as disease. We are correct in our worldview. He reaffirms that our basic beliefs are correct because he interacts with this basic form of disease, as if disease were a universal that could be pulled out of somebody's eye and into his own, and before he heals himself. We also speak about possibility. It's possible to be a metaphysical realist about different things. You can be realist about morality while being nominalist about tables and chairs and colors and such. And one rather nutsy man went even so far as to be realist about possibility. So this is David Lewis. David Lewis thinks he's Batman, in a way. He's decided that when we talk about possibilities, like it's possible to lose an eyeball, it's possible to, I don't know, decide I don't want to do this anymore, just run away and have a beer. Anything's possible. When we talk about this, he says it's best to talk about it in the terms of possible worlds. You imagine a possible world, but it's more than imagination. He says the possible worlds are there. They really exist. And while we cannot go to them because this would violate his theory, we should think of a universe, a multiverse, in which every single possibility that you talk about happens, as a good way of explaining what we mean when we talk about possibility. And once again, with the realist conception of possibility, or as it's called, modality, so modal realism, we once again get fluffy sci-fi following in its footsteps. This is Rick and Morty. This is a possible universe where hamsters rule the world and live in people's bums. If it's a possibility, it must be true. And once again, these possible universes contain a very metaphysical, realist conception. As Price said, the universe is kind of boring. It contains these particular elements which are repeated. The elements are just the elements in your head. You believe in pizza, you think about pizza. So we have pizza ordering people on phones in this possible universe is another way the universe could be. And you just mix it up after there. It's possible that phones could order chairs on people sitting on pizzas. Chairs are ordering phones on the pizzas sitting on people. It's just a rehashing of the same thing over and over again. And the important part is, all of these elements are contained within your mind. It's a complete realist conception of the universe where the basic elements are the basic universals that realists want to talk about. And here we have the answer to the question nobody asked. What if I were a hammer? So this is Hammer Morty. The instantiation of a possible universe nobody wanted to know about. So that's broadly realism done. You've got a basic idea, I think, of what I mean about fluffy sci-fi, family-friendly, funny sci-fi, necessitating a realist outlook at every point. So now onto the Nominalists. Here's one of the most famous. All things are subject to interpretation. Whichever interpretation prevails at a given time is a function of power and not truth. He's telling you that worldview, the idea you have in your head to categorize in the universe, may well function, but it's not true, or at least not in any strict sense. And a different interpretation could easily prevail because it's better, because it's stronger, and it might contain elements that you don't want to think about. And the other one won't be more true just because it's stronger, it's just going to be stronger. That's it. As I said, you can be nominalist and realist about various things. So in particular, I want to look for a wee moment at one of the most common forms of nominalism. Nominalism, by the way, is nameism. It's when you reject realism and you decide that things are the way they are in name only. The underlying reality is just more complicated than you're going to get into. You're picking aside some sort of shadow or abstract reflection of the world just according to your basic needs. Mackey's particular nominalism was all centered around ethics. The idea being that we have two problems in ethics: ontological weirdness and epistemological weirdness. Ontological weirdness meaning ethics are kind of weird things. You know, the chairs have shape. The sunlight has a certain number of joules in it. Everything can be known and has a particular form that it's grounded in. Ethical statements, if I say, you know, don't be shouting in public. You should give to charity. What is that? How much do these statements weigh? How do we know if they're true or not? Well, that's more getting into the epistemological problems. Epistemological problems, of course, referring to theory of knowledge. If you make a bet with your friend about which building is taller, this building or, I don't know, the Palace of Culture, you can make a bet, then you find out on the internet, then you pay the money out. You make a bet about how hot your soup is or a cup of tea, then you get a thermometer, and after the bet is paid out. Then your friend says, I bet you it's wrong to eat animals, morally wrong. What are you going to do at this point? How are you going to find out? How is the money ever going to be paid? You can argue about the shape of your teeth and the way you digest things and blah, 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 and the way we keep chickens. There is no way to collect money on this bet about whether or not it's wrong to eat animals. So according to our theory of knowledge, ethics is just weird. And perhaps just something we go along with because we like it. And of course, we have dark sci-fi backing up the nominalism, showing exactly what's wrong with our mode of thinking on these things. Here's the Xenomorph, and he doesn't care what you think is a good thing and a bad thing. Ba-ba-bum. Yep, video time. Alien, alien, alien.
You still don't understand what you're dealing with, do you? Perfect organism. Its structural perfection is matched only by its hostility.
You admire it.
I admire its purity. Survival. Unclouded by conscience, remorse, or delusions of morality.
There we are. Unclouded by conscience, remorse, or delusions of morality. It's not simply nominalist, or at least it's not simply a film which doesn't necessitate any metaphysical realism. It poses a direct challenge to the idea of ethical realism. And within these dark sci-fi films, I think there's usually some sort of challenge and absolutely no necessitation, unlike the others, for any kind of realism. It wants to reject the basic worldview you have, and this is part of what it makes it slightly uncomfortable. The idea that there's not a bad alien, you're not a hero, there's an evolved creature, an advanced one, and you're a rubbish creature, and you're on the ship with it, and you're probably going to die because you're a bit rubbish, and that's all there is to it. There's no heroism presented in the film. And it doesn't end there. The alien sees in a different way. It doesn't have the same kind of mental categorization, or at least very clearly doesn't need it. You might think you're very different from other people, of whatever types or whatever prejudices go on in your head. The xenomorphs in Alien, the aliens themselves, these xenomorphs don't share your prejudices. They look at you and they see calories. There's an amount of food in your body that it wants. There's no prejudice, you're just weight. Bigger people are better people because it's more food for the offspring. In fact, there's no reason to imagine that a xenomorph would be able to seriously tell the difference between you and a dog. It's just a matter of calories at the end of the day. And while the realist may say that the xenomorph is missing something here, the xenomorph is mistaken, it's not clear how they are mistaken if they're functioning so well. They simply divide the world up in a different way. It's yet again a problem for the ethics. The xenomorphs are intelligent. They can build ship. We can see this in the first one. They can operate machinery. We see this in Aliens as the alien queen starts operating the elevator. They're intelligent. They have fantastic senses. So if you can see ethical statements as true, and they fail to see ethical statements as true, the question is why you see something when they don't. You're not more intelligent. Your senses aren't better. Maybe you're just making something up. On to the lack of distinction between you and the dogs.
The child and the man have gone beyond our world. They are forever, eternal, and everlasting. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust.
Why are the innocent punished? Why the sacrifice? Why the pain? There aren't any promises. Nothing's certain. Only that some get called, some get saved. She won't ever know the hardship and grief for those of us left behind. We commit these bodies to the void with a glad heart. For within each seed, there is a promise of a flower. And within each death, no matter how small, there's always a new life. A new beginning. Amen.
Love that scene. Right, so just a quick recap. Actually, Geiger before there. It's not strictly necessary, but I feel I just had to show a wee reminder of the kind of nominalist themes that you can see even in Geiger's work from the beginning. Because part of what's being talked about here is recognizability, this boringness of the universe. The realists want to say you've got certain ideas, but here we see a fairly unrecognizable thing, and it gets much, much better, or worse, if you're looking at his paintings. Notice how you can't mentally pull things apart. You can't do the usual categorization. You can barely see color. This is almost entirely monochrome. It's hard to see where one piece begins and one piece ends. There's very little that can be labeled, and in some pictures, nothing that can be labeled at all. It's fascinating, but it's a little bit unnerving, and I think some of the unnervingness comes from this nominalistic quality, where the mind automatically tries to pick out one thing as this is an object, that's a different object, the two are separate, this is the function, this is the things that have something in common. But what holds something in common here? It seems you could say any two object or no object. It's not at all clear how to cut the painting up mentally, and where to put the beginnings and the endings in this strange miasma of, what is it? Machinery? Flesh? So we take these images of some strange creature melding with a chair or a chair growing a person or whatever it is, and this basic nominalist idea seems to have morphed into the Alien franchise. Oh, and Predator. Predator might initially look like it's going to be a wee bit of a challenge. Like, hey, Predators, don't they have some sort of basic ethical code? I can test this is not the case. Predators are also a fantastic source of a controversy concerning colors. So when I first mentioned realism, I and most people who present realism will always go with the obvious one, color. There is some property in the universe, such as color. You can't deny it. We know this is that color and that's that color. There's something there. We're not going mad. We can all see it together, unless you're a predator. Now you might think, okay, there's red and green here, but it's not the same thing. This is our representation of something which they're seeing, which is entirely different. And further, the world can be categorized in different ways. You can imagine quite easily a word here for 37 degrees centigrade, the temperature of a human body, and as far as I'm aware, roughly the temperature of a cat. So if you're a predator, you can have one word for this, and it seems like a word for a color, but also the word for a creature. It groups together this one concept: cats, people, and bathtubs. You can run a bath at 37 degrees centigrade. Your tea can become this temperature. You can have one conception for this thing, and you can join together so many different things that don't seem similar to us. And if you can just join together anything in the world to make it similar, depending on your conception, then Price's notion that realism tells us why things are similar is just nonsensical. They're not similar. We just group things together by how we want to see the world. The basic way in which you see the world is functional, not realistic, and realism is shown as a sham. As to the ethics bit, let's see if I can just quickly defend myself here. Predator.
Okay, who's next? Take it.
So, the officer has just killed a predator. Instead of killing him, they reward him with a war trophy, and the rest leave him alone. Initially, it might seem that they have some idea of honor, but the important part here is this corresponds to no word in any human language which you would ever call honor or ethics. It's not warfare. Humans don't go to war in a one-on-one manner. They do this in groups. Those rules don't apply. It's not hunting. When humans are hunting, we will kill individual animals which are unarmed. The predators refuse to kill unarmed creatures. They have this weird version of honor, this thing they have just made up themselves. They refuse to kill anyone if they're if the fight is unfair, but unfair according to a predator's conception. They refuse to kill people in places that we would happily kill deer. So once again, we're shown that while you can have, it's not that there's no ethics in the universe, it's that the entire thing is subjective. Ethics consist of different people having different points of view, and if you go across the universe, you may have people with ideas about how to behave, but it's not clearly ethics in any objective sense. This is why the extension is completely different. This kind of ethical weirdness from Mackie shows up once again. So I think everyone's got a rough idea of what's happening with nominalism. So I just want to recap quickly the theory. It's not at all that I'm saying that if you're a metaphysical realist, then you have to believe in some stupid sci-fi things. It's just that while you're operating in a fluffy sci-fi universe, you'll have to have some heavily realist elements. It seems to naturally arise. Writers just seem to do this on their own. I'm not entirely sure why. The darker sci-fi, I can see why it poses challenges to realism. There's no assurances there about your worldview. And once again, small asterisk, if anyone can find exceptions, at least on this one, I propose that this is going to be poor dark sci-fi. I propose that people are going to find difficulty finding an example of really dark sci-fi which actually works and has a realist framework. It's just going to be too comforting and too reassuring. So to jump through some rapid-paced examples, here's the Power Rangers, clearly fluffy sci-fi. They get power from the crystals. How do you get power from crystals? Well, that's stupid, unless they're batteries. But they're not batteries. The crystals don't contain electricity. They don't contain joules. They contain power. What's that? It's realist metaphysical nonsense. It's the idea of some basic form of power which exists in rocks or minerals, but also then transforms into people and gives you really big muscles. You clearly require a realist version of the universe in order to even state this kind of thing. Guess which side of the camp I'm on. This is Thor. This is his hammer Mjolnir. It detects whether or not somebody is worthy. Can it read minds? No, because people in Asgard cannot read minds. They lie to each other all the time. It clearly does not read your mind and then detects whether or not you're going to do bad things. The hammer detects worthiness, which means worthiness is a property which exists in the universe. There is a universal such as worthiness. The hammer then does a worthiness detection magic trick on you to see whether or not you have instantiated the universal. This is completely impossible in a nominalist framework. It absolutely necessitates that Thor is living in a metaphysically realist framework. This is Ant-Man. He controls ants. Does he do it by hormones? No, because all the different species of ants use different types of hormones, and further, you cannot make ants do this kind of thing, the kind of things he does with hormones. He controls the metaphysical universal of being an ant, whatever that looks like. Aquaman, same deal. How does he control dolphins? They're not fish. How could he control fish anyway? They're not a proper ontological category. They don't even have the same gene structure. There's no such biological categorization as a fish. He just controls the things that we consider to be marine life. Pacific Rim, mind swapping. People swap minds. So what's a mind? It's a collection of atoms which make up brain cells, which are a complicated computer. So does anyone's brain get sucked out? No. No, somehow the mind is separate in some metaphysical, realist way from the actual brain. So the form of mind or whatever it is gets sucked out. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. I'm showing my age here. If you shrink your kids to this size, the oxygen atoms will not be able to pass through the membranes in the lungs and they will suffocate to death. What we're messing with here is the universal of size or like smallness or bigness or something like this. Also, if you grow your kid up to be giant in Honey, I Blew Up the Kid, Part 2, again, collapse of the lungs, and the thing will soon stop breathing and collapse under its own weight. Doesn't happen. Unless you're living in a metaphysically realist universe, in which case you can just alter the basic form of size as if you're on a computer game and you tell the thing, increase the size of this particular instantiation. Fifth element, battling against ultimate evil. Like actual evil. Like the universal decides to pop into the frame and go, "Hi, I'm evil," like the thing itself, and then just starts blowing up spaceships and gets really Jumping on to, last one. X-Men. Storm controls the weather, like water, but not in taps, but in the sky, because that's weather water, and electricity, but not in computers, as in lightning, because that's the weather electricity, because it's special, because the universe recognizes what we call weather, because it really cares, because it's going to make these wee distinctions between what we call good weather and bad weather, and Storm can make, like, the bad weather. She doesn't make sunshine. Right, finally back onto nominalism. I'm not going to go through too many here because it's famously difficult to prove a negative. But in Big Brother, there appears to be a realist conception of the mind for a brief moment, but you're wrong. There are no psychic powers. This is all conjuration tricks. O'Brien's mind does not contain Winston's mind. He does things like Derren Brown does things. This is clearly shown in the book towards the end. The fly might look for a moment that we've got the metaphysical form of a fly, but no. A man is teleported along with a fly, and a computer is required to disassemble the fly, atom by atom, read its gene code, read the man's gene code, reassemble the two of them. A computer is required for the conception of what is and is not a fly, because while the universe doesn't recognize this, the computer does, because it was programmed to by a person who cares about those things. And also the gene code didn't just magically resurrect itself. The computer is required to do this. We're still living in a nominalist framework. And one of my all-time favorites, Metropolis. Again, just clear nominalist sci-fi. No metaphysical realist elements are present throughout the entire film. I can't say there's much challenge to metaphysical realism, but then it's not that much of a dark sci-fi. There's one near exception I've found. Where is it? There we are. Right, we've got dark sci-fi, kind of horror. Watch out for the wee hint of realism here. A tiny sliver.
There's one more chip. And it must be destroyed also.
Here. I cannot self-terminate. You must lower me into the steel.
No.
I'm sorry, John. I'm sorry.
No, it'll be okay. Stay with us. It'll be okay.
I have to go away.
No, don't do it. Please, don't go.
I must go away, John.
No! No, wait. Wait, you don't have to do this.
Sorry.
No, don't do it. Don't go.
It has to end here.
I order you not to go. I order you not to go. I order you not to go.
I know now why you cry. But it's something I can never do.
So, the Terminator, the T-100 model, obviously he sees things in a different way, just like the Predator. He doesn't understand right and wrong, just like the Alien. It's a challenge to our realist ideas about the universe, as usual, except to the end of the film where he says, "I know now why you cry." What on earth does he know? I think this is why the ending is so touching. He's telling us that he's almost understood some basic idea of what it is to be tragic or sad. And again reassures us of this basic understanding, like something else in the universe could see things as we see things. But aside from this small hint, which I think makes up the reason why it's such a switch at the end, there's the basic theory. Thank you everyone for listening, and I invite any counterexamples. May as well use the microphones just for YouTube.
Okay.
I know everyone can hear everyone, but it doesn't go on the feed otherwise.
Yes, I think we should use the microphones. Do we have any questions? Here, okay.
Well, I would like to ask you about the metropolis. I mean, do you remember there is a motto there? Or
Motto?
Motto, yeah, it is motto.
Yeah, some saying.
Quotation. Okay, let's say that. Well, of course, it's not a quote from anything. It's a quote from Metropolis, but it's about the fact that the hands and the mind should be connected by the heart, and it is the story about workers or laborers who are treated not well enough, and about lords, and well, the moral of this whole story is that there is a notion of a heart, but heart is that there is something like compassion, but compassion is universal, and that compassion is something that exists. And it should be enforced somehow. So I think it is a very realist notion.
Compassion people feel, and it should certainly be reinforced, and there's a big socialist element, and quite possibly it's not that much in the way of really dark sci-fi, even if it's got this heavy, brooding, gothic element. But there's no necessity for the realism. If we have a million people all shouting that they can see love or tragedy, it doesn't change anything. It could still be correct or a delusion. So everyone in the city pushes this idea, but there is no instantiation of love itself walking onto the screen. There is no point where the reality is required. It could be a group delusion for all that, I'm afraid.
Right, but it's not like any of the characters says this. Those are the words of the narrator. Those are the letters that appear on the screen. They come from beyond.
Yeah, it's got a strong socialist message. Though still nothing within the film provides an absolute requirement for the universal to be real. It's an injunction. It's saying, please do this. But let's say they're all deluded. How is the movie wrong? The film is still fine, the events are still fine. You can carry on these events with a massive citywide delusion of there being compassion. Or maybe it's not a delusion, it's just something that people want, which is nice, but not necessarily metaphysically realist.
Okay, I have two questions, if I may. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I do have a few concerns, because I'm not entirely sold on your idea. First thing is, I'm not sure if the movies you mentioned, like, for example, Honey, I Shrunk Kids, is it really realism what's wrong with them? Or, well, maybe not wrong, okay. But isn't that just lousy storytelling?
It's definitely unrealistic, and I think it's definitely realist. Reason being that what's happened is the author has a description in her mind about the properties of the people, and the properties are changing, which suggests people really operating according to properties. And they have to be very real properties at that, because the properties themselves are tweaked in the relationship with people.
I'm just not sure if that necessitates realism, really. It isn't just your interpretation, which is interesting, of course, but I'm not entirely convinced. For example, with the Thor, with the hammer, like, yeah, we can read it like realist way. So we have the Mjolnir. He understands what is worthiness, and he chooses worthy worthy people. But can't we just read it like he has just his own, like, somehow he has some own idea of worthiness, and it doesn't have to be a real idea. He has a, there's magic in the universe, all right?
It can't be his idea because the hammer cannot be used by him when he is deemed unworthy. So if it was his idea of worthiness, he would always consider himself worthy, as he did at the time, and he would be able to use the hammer at all times. But Mjolnir cannot stop it. We've also got the problem of skepticism. Let's say I want to tell you, like, I don't believe in worthiness. It's a silly human construct. It's not real. I can say this to you, but then you present me with Mjolnir, and this reliably picks out, like, good people and bad people. You're challenging me with Mjolnir. You could very easily challenge me. And then I say to you, like, I don't believe in size. Size is stupid. There's a certain number of atoms, and they form a more or less cohesive unit. Size isn't a real thing. Total mass within certain parameters is a real thing, but you can't just say, like, big and small. That's just a sort of shortcut you use because we're all simple monkeys. You can challenge me with Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. You go, look, we've got a size machine. It adjusts size. It detects and adjusts size. Clearly, you're wrong, and size is a real thing. You can challenge anyone with this.
All right. Well, I don't know. I just think it's just sort of plot hole, really, with, like you mentioned, with the oxygen and things.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, but on the other side, we have, like, Xenomorphs. Very interesting, but at the same time, I'm not sure. Like, I think you could still have sort of realism on kind of higher level and still have Xenomorphs and just explain them, like, with platonic forms. You still have the form of Xenomorph, and it has all those characteristics that you described. So there still can be a realism interpretation that we have the form of Xenomorph, which makes Xenomorph, as you have in your title of your presentation. One of the characteristics of Xenomorphs is that they are nominalists, and they do not act as realists.
Well, as I said in the review,
still could be read on the different levels. So
it could be read as a realist level. So the darker sci-fi does not necessitate realism. The fluffy sci-fi does. Of course, you could have dark sci-fi and then say, I'm still a realist in an alien universe. It poses challenges, but there's no necessity there. Like, yeah, you could absolutely be a realist operating in a Terminator movie.
All right, thank you.
Some questions more? Okay, so I have a question. I was thinking about something that I think I would put on a fluffy sci-fi part of your spectrum, Star Trek, but it's, yes, there is a realist outlook. There are qualities, there are ethics and good and evil present in the universe, but it still is challenging. And for example, there is Borg, the alien who doesn't have this outlook. It's a swarm of machines combined with biological form, a little bit similar to Xenomorphs, as you showed them to us. So I think there are instances of challenges to realism, but still I wouldn't call it darker sci-fi. So how do you respond to this?
Anything that's not clearly fluffy or clearly dark falls outside of the scope.
Okay, so it's not a spectrum, it's just
two areas here.
Okay.
But if you, it's certainly, if you wanted to classify it as fluffy, it's definitively realist because it has the multiverse thing. Just like David Lewis was talking about multiple universes, we see multiple Star Trek worlds where different possibilities happen all over the place.
Okay. Are there any more questions? Okay, so thank you very much.
Cheers for listening.